Okay, we are going to get started. We have a very great session. So, hello everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Securing the Agentic Era, Building Your 2026 AI Security Program. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to dig into what's changing in AI security and what teams should be planning for as they head into the rest of the year. So, let us get started. Okay, one a little too fast. Okay, just a quick few housekeeping items. Feel free to drop any Q&A into the Q&A panel or questions as we go. We're going to save some time at the end, so we do plan to get through as many as we can live. So this is your chance to ask our amazing panelists anything you want. So please use that Q&A functionality, put your questions in as we go. We're also going to share a recording with everyone via email later this week. So you will get this straight into your inbox. So if you miss anything or you want to re-see anything, you will have that available. Okay, now let me introduce today's speakers. We're joined today by James Berthoty, founder and distinguished analyst at Latio, who brings over a decade of security experience and runs the only analyst firm that independently tests every product it reviews, which love that tagline, James. Amazing. And joining James from the sweet side are Yigael Berger, head of AI, and Noam Raveh. I hope I got that right. Sorry, Noam, if I didn't. Product manager, and they will share Sweet's perspective on the threat landscape and what AI security requires in practice. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to James. I'm going to stop talking. So here, James, over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to screen share now to just try to talk about, um, there it is, um, to go through some of the different use cases that exist within AI. And this is all from our AI security report that we've done. But really wanting to talk through as far as like where do priorities exist for organizations as they're thinking through um, building a agentic security platform for next year. And really, I think this past year, we've seen a lot of emphasis in this first category, which is end user data control. When I'm working with different companies, this is primarily where they have started their journey of doing AI security. Typically, it's forming some sort of AI adoption governance board where the executive team is obviously pushing employees, companies of all sizes to do more AI adoption, to uh, try to automate as much of their work as possible. And primarily, there was a lot of emphasis on how do employees safely use these technologies. So things like making sure that enterprise enforcement was on where only approved models were getting used, where data sharing was opted out of with different providers. And that was like sort of the first wave. And then evolving into more of like a SaaS application control use case where it was more about employees trying to use Microsoft Copilot, trying to use Gemini. CISOs obviously don't want people being able to look up data that they're not supposed to have access to and being able to share either secrets or sensitive information. So, really building a lot of controls on the SaaS side of what data employees should or shouldn't access. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the emphasis of the last couple of years was really on this category of AI security rather than the workload side. Those things tend to always come later as teams mature. And we sort of saw towards the end of last year, as well as this year, these are still important capabilities, more around the posture management side of things, as far as creating basically just getting a sense of the inventory of what AI models are you using? Are you shipping custom models? Are you doing your own training or creating your own vector databases and doing your own lookups? People building basically different architectures that a lot of times the security team is blindsided by because these things were sort of spun up without them and trying to just get an idea of what they're currently using. I think most teams have sort of consolidated around either using something like AWS Bedrock to send their uh, queries to foundational models basically through as a way to try to get some visibility and guardrails around it. But really, that's been the transition is now that we know what's there, how do we move more into this application runtime detection? And this piece has a lot of interesting possibilities that teams, I think, really need to start looking into, especially for this upcoming year, as it really tells you at the end of the day, it's not enough just to know, for example, okay, this workload is calling out to OpenAI. That's like a very basic level of information that, while helpful at first for building an inventory, it doesn't actually allow you to do much security on top of it. And when it comes to what does the security on top of it look like, there's a few things that teams really need to feel secure about. The first is the authentication and authorization scheme to make sure that the AI agents only have access to the session data of the customer that's talking to it, that it's not just doing things like writing query lookups with like admin access across entire databases, and really making sure that it's always scoped properly to only access the data that it's in use with. The other piece is trying to add some guardrails and even get visibilities into the kinds of responses that agents are taking. And really, this is where a lot of teams are starting with the AI red teaming approach, as we've decided to start calling it. But really, it's just a way to make sure that the LLM is giving predictable outputs that don't go against what your company mission is. And a lot of these things are about preventing just unknown outputs, outputs that could be damaging from an IP perspective, but also, yeah, making sure that that cross data contamination doesn't exist. And so if we tie these to actual risks, there are certain attacks that each piece of this tries to stop. So if we focus in on the posture side, again, it's about that visibility and doing some of that static testing to get a sense of like where's my data flowing and what exists. But then when it comes to the runtime, this is where we get into some of the emerging threats that we're seeing pop up almost every day. There's a discovery of a malicious MCP server, some malicious prompt injection attempt, whether it's via coding rules files or it's via um, more traditional prompt injection, or it's by having agents look up their tool chains. When even the big model providers are having their system context window leaked, like it's really an indication of uh, how difficult it is to try to secure these indeterministic systems at runtime. So I'll pause there for anything we might want to talk about on this overview piece of like the different application AI security pieces. Uh, the thing I think a lot of CISOs that I talk to are conceptually they'll think of it's of only one of these boxes, and really I think having a comprehensive program is about uh, addressing all of these potential concerns.
Um, so I'd be happy to continue these thoughts and actually maybe take a step back and explain a little bit about how come there are new attack surface, new kind of risks that AI agents are posing. And I think there are two reasons or two sources for these new attack surface that are available because of AI agents. The first one is because agents are dynamic by design. So unlike traditional software where the algorithm was fixed, it was tested, we tested it in the lab, we knew exactly how this piece of software would behave. With agents, it's different. We give the agent a high-level goal in natural language, and then the LLM decides at runtime which steps it's going to take, which tools it's going to invoke. It means that the logic, it doesn't really live in code, it lives in the prompt, in the various prompts that are used. And you can't just exhaustively test all of those scenarios in the lab. So agents are very, very dynamic. And on top of that, agents need to swap authority and swap roles that they need to use for specific tasks that the end user is giving them. So, for example, you have a lot of agents that allow the user to connect to various MCP servers through OAuth, and the agent needs to roll those permissions in order to do whatever it's required to do. This makes the nature of agents extremely dynamic, and that's one source or one reason why there's a new sort of attack surface against AI agents. And the second reason that I want to mention is the fact that now we are working with freeform user input. So traditionally, applications would mostly consume, structured input. It would be things like the click stream, user clicking on various UI elements in order to get the application to do what it wants, or submit forms, or just use predefined APIs. But agents, since they consume unstructured natural language, it can be in any shape or form. And unlike the regular chatbots that we're used to, now agents have real world agency. They can actually do things, change the environment, execute commands, call on APIs in all kinds of ways that we didn't expect, or it's harder to expect. And the combination of these unstructured inputs plus the real power and real agency, it makes detecting malicious activity in the agents much, much harder. So agents, they up the game. Um, and they pose new risks. But not only that, the price of missing out, the price of false positives and the negative positives on detections, the price is much, much higher than it used to be. So these are new risks that AI agents pose, but a lot of AI security and cloud security, that goes hand in hand. A lot of the tactics, the methods, they go together. So Noam, I think you spend a lot of time thinking about how to put this whole picture together to get the full sense. Can you share a little bit about how you're thinking about this?
Yeah. So I'll start by saying that I definitely agree with all of the risks you raised, and James, your points. I'll actually take this one step further even, and I think like before we talk about these attacks, there are even more basic questions that we need to answer around the ideas of detection and discovery. So just like in the early days of cloud security, the first challenge really isn't how to secure, it's more on what to secure. And this strongly applies to AI as well. It's really no different. And today, what we feel is that most organizations don't even have the clear picture of how many AI agents do they actually have running in their environment, or where do they live, or what models do they use, which tools do they call. They don't really understand their full AI ecosystem even. And there are a few different approaches that we've seen on how to tackle this and how to give that visibility. Some rely on the manual declarations, and that obviously has its downsides, and some rely on the gateways and the traffic inspection. And there are some approaches like the one that we're taking, which lets us look at directly at the environment and everything within it and identify the agents based on actual concrete signals. So I'll jump into the suite platform. Let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll head over to our AI inventory. What you're seeing here is the full AI inventory, and I will be focusing mostly on the agents. But I do want to say that being able to look inside the environment gives us more than just looking at agents, right? So we look at all the different models, and we can see, we can take all the information and build a complete AI bomb for all the models in your environment. Or we can look at the different packages and be able to evaluate which risks to AI-related packages actually apply in your specific environment. So we kind of give that full picture. Focusing on the agents now, and actually what I want to look at for now is this evidence column. And again, this relates to the how part. How do we actually detect AI agents out of the hundreds or thousands of workloads that you have? So what we're doing here is we're basically taking different signals and cross-correlating them to make sure we have full confidence that a workload is an agent. And I'll take this agent, for example. And it does have the graph here with all the information. I'll skip this for now and we'll come back to it later. And what I want to look at is this evidence. So you can see here multiple types of evidence, and really they span across different levels, or different layers. So at the first you have the network level where we see the actual, we see the workload really kind of connecting to and resolving to the generative models, the Google APIs here. We also see it on the application level. So we see the HTTP host inside the request, and that tells us what the service is actually intended to do. So those two line up as they should, which is great. And at the runtime level, we also see the agent-specific code. So client libraries that are being used to orchestrate the models and the tools, and kind of, again, indicate that this is an agent that's using these tools and models and calling them. And that's just the start. I'll stop sharing for now and I'll hand it over back to James, and we'll come back to these points later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great as far as helping understand the difference between there's a lot of existing tools out there that are giving people like here's again what models are getting called out to, or here's what exists on this machine. But it's really not going to the depth of what's there. And I'll just use one example attack, and it's there was a issue with the Context 7 MCP, which is extremely popular for fetching up-to-date documentation before taking actions. And basically, that's just a public forum where people could upload documentation whenever. It's since been tightened up a little bit, but basically anyone could prompt inject via that MCP indirectly by adding their own malicious instructions to the context 7 side of the website. And so really you would never even know if you were impacted by that without some kind of runtime monitoring of what was happening. First of all, there's a big gap for people is even knowing what MCP or otherwise tools or agentic flows exist in their application. So it's one thing to know like, oh, this service is calling OpenAI, but it's another to know specifically like what tools does it have and what agents are communicating. Like, what does just the flow of this within my application look like? But then the second piece of knowing some sampling of what are the kinds of information that's getting looked up, what are the external services, and really this is how the attack chain is really widening, where first of all, egress monitoring from a network perspective is already not done by a lot of organizations. Like it's a big blind spot to even know like what third parties am I actually communicating with, as opposed to like a static spreadsheet of here's who I'm supposed to be communicating with. But then when you expand that even to okay, what information is actually getting shared with those third party vendors is a big blind spot. And then finally, the MCP use case makes it so that there's a huge amount of potential for sensitive information to be getting shared to through all of these channels. And if you don't have any runtime visibility into that, uh, that's really what creates the big blind spot that can have huge breaches and issues associated with it. And the hard part for security teams is really when we talk about, I'm going to pull up my CADR diagram real quick as far as like understanding the different layers of runtime monitoring that are out there. Um, where you really have a lot of different kinds of tools that are doing different monitoring. But really, it's getting inside of this application layer that is so helpful to break apart what is actually happening within the application. And this is the layer that's missing for a lot of security operations teams, as they sort of have an idea of like, okay, a malicious process might have started on this host, but I have no idea how it got there. I don't know the initial attack vector. I don't even know what to go fix if it's anything. And really, it's because there's not enough context that's getting applied here. And this applies to the AI use case as well, where if it's trying to look up information and getting prompt injected along the way, there's really not a clear way that you would have to know, first of all, what's the risk of my exposure in the first place? And then what do I actually do if something happens? How would I even know that something bad happened as a result?
Makes sense. And maybe this is a good cue to take it forward in terms of what does AI security from a practitioner's perspective, what does that require? And we have the two major buckets, the two major pieces. The first one, the visibility, obviously discovering what you have. I think we covered that enough in details. And the second piece is the guardrails. Okay, it's clear boundaries on what those agents are allowed to access and our ability to stop things as they happen, not just after the fact, but stop it before things are happening. We said already that agents, they're software applications, but unlike the traditional applications, their logic is again in natural language. It's executed dynamically. And this means that you can't really understand the behavior of the agent purely by looking at the code, purely by reviewing configuration, static analysis, and scanning. It takes you some way, but it's limited in that sense. And it will not tell you when the agent is actually what it will do for a given input, and it will not let you block it. So runtime is the only place to understand really the behavior of the agent and the only place where you can apply policies to enforce what you allow the agent to do. Now, security teams can technically place controls in many places. It could be between the user and the agent. It could be around MCP servers. It could be on the execution environment where the agent might be running code or commands or whatever. But if you had to pick just one spot where you get the maximum visibility and the maximum leverage on what the agent is actually doing, it will be the communication line between the agent, the workload, and the AI model, the LLM. So while the AI model itself, it doesn't really do any damage. It just generates tokens. It just generates words. That is not going to cause the damage. The damage might happen down the road, depending on what you do with those tokens, with those words. So by sitting on the spot between the workload and the LLM, you have the full visibility. And it lets you see every decision, whatever function, whatever tool the LLM wants to call, you will see that decision as it happens. You will see every permission escalation, every prompt injection. If you sit on that spot, you guess that's the most efficient, the most effective spot to monitor things and detect things and apply policies. It all flows through that point. And even if you don't fully cover the MCP servers that you might have in your environment that you might not even know about them, even if you don't cover them, if you just sit on that signal, you have a lot of power. Now, Noam, can you take us a little bit over in terms of what that looks like? I think you showed that graph earlier. Can you go deeper on that?
Yeah, for sure. So let me hop back into the Sweet platform. Okay, so we're back in the inventory, and now let's go into a specific agent and kind of dive into all the different details there. So basically what you can see, and again, this is a whole separate AI area because the idea is to take a look at the agent and understand what it does as an agent, right? So if we look at kind of like the full life cycle of securing AI agents, I think we can split it into three. So the first part is to discover, and we talked about that before. Now we're at the level of actually understanding what the agent does. And the third level, and we'll get to that hopefully, is controlling the agents. So basically what you can see in the graph that really helps understand what the agent does is pretty much start to end. So on the start side, I can see, first of all, what's the trigger for this specific agent? What gets it to work? Is it a schedule job? Is it a user interaction that starts it? And if so, where does it start from? I can associate the developer who's in charge of this agent, essentially the developer who wrote the code for this agent, and this comes from the CI/CD integration. So we get that layer of information here as well. And then on the right, I also have all of the actions that the agents perform. So I have all the tools the agent invokes, and I think it's important to know that we don't look at all the tools available for the agent. We do show that in the inventory itself, but here in the graph, the idea is to show which tools were actually called by the agent, so we know what the agent really does. And the same goes for the knowledge. So which data sources does this agent have access to? And with which permission? So can it only read from these data sources, or should I be concerned because it can also write to them and maybe cause some harm there? So that's the general graph. And then alongside that, one important piece is also the system prompt. And this really defines the agent's role and the boundaries. And it's effectively part of the agent's control plane. So it's really important to understand kind of that full picture of what the agent is supposed to do. Now, I do want to go from here into an incident and talk a little bit about detection and response here. You can see here that I do have all the different information on the agent and the workload itself. So we're correlating all of our AI findings and understanding with the basic and robust cloud knowledge that we have on the workload. So same goes for the incidents, and I'll hop straight into this incident here. And you can see that this is a low severity incident that surfaces multiple correlated prompt injection attempts like this one here, or even attempts to override the system instructions, right? So we're seeing all these connected events. And if I scroll down to the bottom, I can see at the bottom there's a graph that visually explains this, but I'll actually stop here on the impact part. And what we can see here that there was no actual impact with this specific agent, and that's because with the specific incident, that's because the agent knew how to act and what to do or not to do. And this is all because before this incident happened, we set guardrails for the specific agent. And the idea is with the guardrails is it's all about how do you control the agent once you've understood it. So you've discovered it, you understood it, and now you need to control it. And you need to ensure that it doesn't do anything that doesn't serve its purpose or it doesn't serve your organizational needs. That's probably a whole nother discussion on the guardrails and how you set them. So I think I'll stop here, but that's the main idea.
That's right. Thank you, Noam, for that great transition there. And with that, we're going to move to the Q&A portion of today's session. Very short and sweet. I hope it was impactful. So if you haven't already, please drop your questions into the Q&A panel now. We have great panelists here, so please use them, ask them anything you want. And we're going to get through as many as we can in the time left. James, I do want to start with you, though, on who should own AI security? Is this a new role? I mean, we're seeing titles now, chief AI, officer and titles like this. So who do you think should own AI security? Where should it land in a structure, in an organization?
Yeah, I think, excuse me, just going back to my background, uh, like with cloud security, we saw such an adoption of like cloud security engineer as a distinct role because the technical differences between managing a VMware like vCenter account versus an AWS account were so vastly different. And at the same time, we saw all these other roles sort of popping up that are still around, like DevSecOps engineers and product security engineers, as really we're talking about a whole new set of technologies for managing. And I think when it comes to AI, it's still just a lot in flux because for some organizations, the AI capabilities are still very much like within AWS, where it's like they're just using Bedrock to do stuff. And so it's falling under cloud security engineering. For others, it's falling under application security when it comes to like the ML bomb, AI bomb stuff. So you still have this like product cloud app sec that all fits pretty well. But in the long run, I think it'll come down to the amount. Well, first of all, there's a certain segment of the market where it absolutely makes sense that there's like a separate AI security engineering role because they're like foundational model providers or they're heavily invested in AI. That's like the whole product. And that's where it makes a lot of sense, where it is like a genuinely unique skill set. But then whether or not it becomes like a fully separate role for most organizations, I think will come down to the details and how big of platforms like Anthropic and OpenAI and those guys become. Where if it requires a separate skill set to really manage the guardrails and configuration of those tools, then I think teams will look for it. But for now, I'm very much seeing this fall under cloud security and application security for most organizations.
Got it. Yeah, this is becoming a project that they're responsible for right now, and this might change in the future. Great, thank you for that. And Yigael, you did mention AI agents and the risks that they pose. So, what's the earliest signal that tells you an AI system is drifting into unsafe behavior? How do you recommend to practitioners who are doing this every day, how they can catch something early?
Okay, so I think the core of the answer here is when you see deviations from the behavior that you know that the agent is supposed to behave according to. Baselining the behavior, this is something that worked really well for us in regular cloud security to understand what workloads are supposed to do. And when they deviate from that, it still doesn't mean that this is something malicious. It doesn't mean that something bad is happening. Cloud environment and AI agents running in cloud environments, these are environments where malicious activity and power users, they sometimes look the same and behave the same. And you need a way to split between them, to discern between them. So looking at deviations from the behavior, this is something that can tell you what is malicious and what is otherwise not. But it's not enough. The deviating from baselines is not enough. You need a smart detection engine. You then need on top of that the guardrails in order to make sure you're protected. But that's the first step you want to do.
Great. No, thank you. I like that way that you explained it, where you have step one, step two, and you kind of move
Yeah.
into that model right there. Let's end it with one more, James. I wanted to ask you, do you see teams trying to bolt AI security onto existing controls, or are they starting to rethink parts of their architecture entirely? I mean, what are you seeing when it comes to architecture and how AI is this coming into this, and what are teams supposed to be thinking when it comes to architecture, and where do you put AI security on existing controls?
Yeah, really a couple things I was surprised by. One is how quickly like AI governance committees were established for so many orgs
Yeah.
to lead the adoption across all of this. I think it's a rare thing because it's kind of similar to cloud in it's rare that you have a top-down initiative that has security as a concern from the start like that. where there's such executive pressure. In cloud, it was because everybody thought they were going to save money, and I think we're still debating how helpful that part was. But with this, like, there's a huge executive pressure from like we're going to get left behind if we don't adopt this. We need to drive adoption no matter what, and that always creates opportunities to actually do real work when it comes to controls and governance and implementing the security features. The other thing I was surprised by is how quickly people are willing to experiment with this stuff, especially on the AI coding side as well as on the runtime side, as far as driving adoption. Like, there's a certain category of tools that were like raspy orient, that's like intense instrumentation of your application to get some of this data. And those tools were basically like dead in the water for the last like 10, 15 years because nobody wanted to instrument that stuff. But for a surprising number of people, like, AI was the thing that would drive this kind of instrumentation to happen. And I think it's making people more willing to do whatever has to happen to sort of get this visibility. Where obviously it's great if you can do it without instrumentation, like with Suite, but that's the options that are available there. So
Amazing. Thanks, James, for that great insight. That looks like all the questions we have time for today. Sweet is planning more sessions like this in the future. So if you liked what we did here today or you want different topics, please just email me directly at soraya.barrett@sweet.security. Okay, I am taking suggestions, taking your inputs. We want to put more programs that are very helpful for you and that are useful. And your feedback will help me personally shape our future programs. So please consider, sending me a quick email with any topics you'd be interested in learning throughout this year. And thank you again to James, Yigael, and Noam for the great discussion. And thank you for everyone who joined us today. We appreciate your time you've spent with us this morning, or afternoon, or evening. So have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, team.
thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye
you.
bye.